The poor single mom was called a burden until the Mafia boss knelt before her in public. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day and that good luck finds you wherever you are. Before we begin, may I borrow just 5 seconds of your good fortune? Please help support this channel by subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss another heartfelt story. Your kindness truly means more than you know, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here and supporting this journey. Now I would love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And now, without waiting another moment, let us begin this unforgettable story together. The strongest people are often the ones the world mistakes for the weakest. I kept my head down as I adjusted the stack of clean table linens in my arms, pretending not to notice the whispers following me across the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors while wealthy guests laughed over sparkling glasses and expensive conversations that seemed to belong to a completely different world. My name is Grace Walker, and for the past 4 years I have worked every job I could find to keep a roof over my daughter Lily's head. That afternoon, the babysitter canceled without warning, leaving me with no choice but to bring my 7-year-old to work. Lily sat quietly in a small chair near the service hallway, coloring inside an old notebook with a handful of worn crayons she carried everywhere. She never complained. She never asked why other children spent weekends at parks while she spent hers waiting for her mother to finish another shift. She simply smiled every time I looked her way, as though she believed I could fix everything. That smile kept me standing even when exhaustion begged me to give up. "Mom, I finished another picture," Lily whispered proudly as I passed by. I crouched beside her and admired the drawing. It showed a tiny house beneath a bright blue sky with 3 people holding hands. "Who is the third person?" I asked gently. Lily shrugged with innocent confidence. "I do not know yet. I just think someday our family will have one more person." My heart tightened, but I kissed the top of her head instead of answering. Before I could return to work, a sharply dressed woman walking past stopped and frowned. "Is that your child?" she asked loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Yes, ma'am," I replied politely. "My sitter had an emergency today." She sighed dramatically. This is exactly why businesses lose their standards. Employees keep bringing personal problems into professional places. Several guests glanced toward us. I felt heat rising into my face, but remained calm. "She will stay out of everyone's way," I said quietly. "I promise." Lily lowered her eyes to her notebook, pretending not to hear. The woman shook her head before walking away, but her words did not disappear with her. They spread through the ballroom in quiet murmurs. I returned to arranging tables while pretending the whispers did not exist. A few minutes later, another guest laughed as he walked by. "Some people expect the world to carry them," he remarked to his companions without even looking directly at me. Being a single parent does not excuse bringing baggage everywhere. I swallowed the hurt and continued folding napkins with steady hands. I had learned long ago that dignity often means refusing to argue with people who have already decided your worth. Across the room, Lily carefully gathered a crayon that had rolled beneath her chair before placing it back into the small box as though protecting a treasure. She smiled at another little girl passing by, but the child's parents gently guided their daughter farther away. Lily simply returned to her drawing without saying a word. That quiet acceptance hurt far more than any insult aimed at me. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened once again. Every conversation seemed to soften as a tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit entered with calm confidence. The intricate tattoos hidden beneath his sleeves remained invisible to everyone except those who knew him well. Adrian Brooks acknowledged no applause, sought no attention, and spoke to no one immediately. His sharp eyes slowly surveyed the room before stopping on a little girl coloring alone beside the service hallway, then lifting toward the tired mother who kept working as though her breaking heart could somehow remain invisible. The people who judge the fastest usually understand the least about what someone has survived. I try to keep my attention on the rows of polished silverware waiting to be arranged across the banquet tables, but I could still feel the weight of curious eyes following every step I took. Lily remained quietly in her chair near the service hallway, carefully coloring another page while swinging her small feet above the floor. Every few minutes, she looked toward me and smiled, making certain I knew she was all right. That simple smile carried me through days when nothing else could. Adrian Brooks accepted greetings from several influential guests with calm professionalism. Yet I noticed something unusual. Although people surrounded him, his attention kept drifting back toward my daughter. He watched the way she patiently gathered each crayon after using it. He noticed how she folded the corner of her drawing so it would not wrinkle. Most people saw only a child who did not belong there. He seemed to notice everything else. Lily suddenly stood up after spotting a tray of folded cloth napkins that had slipped slightly from a nearby service cart. Before any employee reached it, she carefully adjusted the stack with both hands to prevent it from sliding onto the floor. She looked around, smiled to herself, and quietly returned to her chair without expecting anyone to thank her. Adrian observed the entire moment from across the ballroom. Daniel, his trusted associate, stepped beside him. "Your meeting starts in 5 minutes," he reminded him softly. Adrian nodded without looking away. "It can wait another minute." Daniel followed Adrian's gaze until he noticed Lily. "She is a polite little girl," he remarked. Adrian answered almost absent-mindedly. Children rarely learn kindness by accident. Meanwhile, the event manager approached me with visible concern. "Grace," he whispered, "a few guests have complained again." I lowered my eyes. "I understand. I know your situation," he continued quietly, "but tonight is an important fundraiser. Please try to keep your daughter completely out of sight." I forced a grateful smile despite the ache in my chest. "She already is." Before he could answer, Lily walked over holding another drawing. "Mom," she whispered, "I made this for you." It showed a woman standing beneath bright stars with the words "You are my hero" written in careful block letters across the top. I knelt beside her and hugged her gently. "Thank you, sweetheart. I will keep this forever." A nearby guest overheard us and sighed loudly. "Some people always bring drama wherever they go." Another replied with a dismissive laugh. "That little girl deserves better than growing up following her mother from job to job." Every word landed like another stone against my heart, but I refused to let Lily see my pain. I stood, smoothed my uniform, and returned to work. Across the room, Adrian's expression changed almost imperceptibly. His calm demeanor remained, but Daniel recognized the quiet disappointment behind his eyes. Adrian had spent years surrounded by people who measured success through wealth and influence. Yet the only person in the ballroom showing genuine grace was the woman everyone seemed determined to belittle. As the evening continued, one of the servers accidentally dropped a tray near the entrance. Glasses rattled loudly across the floor. Without hesitation, Lily hurried toward the frightened young employee carrying a small stack of clean dinner napkins. "It is okay," she said with innocent sincerity. "Everybody has accidents sometimes." The young server smiled gratefully through obvious embarrassment. Adrian witnessed the exchange from only a few feet away. A faint smile appeared across his face for the first time that evening. Then he quietly asked Daniel a single question that would change everything. "Who is that child's mother?" Daniel looked toward me, then back at Adrian before answering. "Her name is Grace Walker." Adrian repeated my name slowly, almost as though it stirred a memory buried somewhere deep inside him. And for reasons he could not yet explain, he knew he could not leave that ballroom without learning the rest of my story. The hardest decision a loving parent ever makes is not whether to fight back, but whether to walk away before their child believes the cruel words spoken by strangers. I had almost convinced myself that the evening would end without getting any worse. The ballroom buzzed with elegant conversations while servers moved gracefully between beautifully decorated tables. Lily had returned to her small chair with her coloring book, quietly humming to herself as though the whispers around us belonged to someone else's world. I wished I could protect that innocence forever. My hope lasted only a few minutes. The same sharply dressed woman who had criticized us earlier approached the event manager again, this time with several influential guests standing beside her. She crossed her arms and glanced toward Lily before speaking loudly enough for nearby conversations to stop. "How much longer are we expected to tolerate this?" she demanded. People paid a great deal of money to attend this event, not to watch an employee turn the ballroom into a daycare. The event manager looked deeply uncomfortable. "Ma'am, the child has caused no disruption." She shook her head impatiently. "That is not the point. Standards matter. If one employee is allowed to bring personal problems to work, everyone else will expect the same treatment." A middle-aged businessman standing beside her nodded in agreement. "Exactly. People need to learn that life does not reward excuses. She chose her circumstances." Those words struck harder than I wanted to admit. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. Arguing would only draw more attention to Lily. My daughter looked up from her drawing and immediately recognized the expression I always try to hide whenever life became too heavy. She quietly gathered her crayons and slipped them back into their small cardboard box without saying a word. Then she picked up her notebook and walked toward me with careful little steps. "Mom," she whispered gently, "we could go home now if it helps." I felt my heart break in complete silence. A 7-year-old should never feel responsible for making an adult's life easier. I knelt beside her and brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "None of this is your fault, sweetheart." She gave me a brave little smile that no child should ever have needed to learn. "I know." I stood and looked toward the event manager before speaking softly. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to work tonight. I think it is best if Lily and I leave." He looked genuinely disappointed. "Grace, you do not have to." I gently interrupted him. "Sometimes protecting your child matters more than finishing a shift." He lowered his head, unable to argue. I reached for my apron strings and slowly untied them, folding the fabric neatly before placing it on the nearby service card. Lily slipped her small hand into mine without hesitation. Together we began walking toward the ballroom entrance, trying to disappear as quietly as we had arrived. Conversations resumed around us, but I could still hear a few satisfied murmurs. Someone whispered that the problem had finally solved itself. Another remarked that professionalism had been restored. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last, yet I refused to let my shoulders fall. Lily deserved to see her mother leave with dignity, even if her heart was breaking inside. Just before we reached the entrance, the room suddenly grew quiet again. It was not because another complaint had been made. It was because a tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit had calmly stepped away from the table reserved for the evening's most important guest. Adrian Brooks walked directly toward us with measured, confident steps. Daniel watched silently from a distance, already recognizing the determined expression that appeared only when Adrian had made an irreversible decision. Every guest instinctively turned to watch. Adrian stopped only a few feet in front of me. His eyes met mine with calm respect, then slowly lowered toward the frightened little girl still holding my hand. Without saying a single word, he took one deliberate step forward, and the entire ballroom held its breath, sensing that the next moment would become impossible for anyone present to forget. Respect is not proven by the height of the person standing. Sometimes it is revealed by the strength of the person willing to kneel. The ballroom fell into complete silence as Adrian Brooks stopped directly in front of me. Every pair of eyes followed him. Wealthy investors, business executives, event organizers, and hotel staff all seemed to forget why they had gathered there in the first place. Even the musicians quietly lowered their instruments, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. I instinctively tightened my hold on Lily's small hand. "Sir," I said softly, unsure why someone so important had approached us. "If this is about my daughter, we were already leaving." Adrian looked at me with calm sincerity before gently shaking his head. "No," he replied. "That is exactly why I came." Before I could ask what he meant, Adrian slowly lowered himself onto one knee in front of me. A collective gasp echoed throughout the ballroom. The same guests who had been whispering moments earlier now stood frozen in disbelief. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, almost smiling to himself. He had worked beside Adrian for many years, and he knew that once Adrian made a decision based on his principles, no amount of public attention would ever change his mind. I stared at him, unable to move. "Please," I whispered nervously. "You do not have to do this." Adrian looked up at me with quiet respect. "Ido." His voice remained calm, yet every word carried effortlessly through the silent ballroom. A few minutes ago, I watched this room judge a hardworking mother for doing everything she could to protect her child. I watched people mistake sacrifice for weakness and responsibility for failure. No one interrupted him. "Tonight, I have not seen a burden," Adrian continued. "I have seen a woman who refused to abandon her daughter simply to satisfy the expectations of strangers. I have seen a mother continue working despite humiliation because providing for her child mattered more than protecting her own pride. That deserves respect." I felt tears filling my eyes before I even realized I was crying. Lily looked up at Adrian with innocent confusion. "Mister," she asked quietly, "why are you kneeling?" Adrian smiled warmly at her. "Because your mother has earned it." Lily looked toward me before wrapping both of her little hands around mine. "I told you people would see how good you are someday," she whispered. My heart almost gave way beneath the weight of those simple words. Adrian slowly stood, but the silence remained. He turned toward the guests surrounding us. "Success means very little if it teaches us to look down on people carrying responsibilities we have never had to bear," he said. "True strength is measured by how we treat those who have nothing to offer us except their dignity." The sharply dressed woman who had spoken against us earlier lowered her eyes. The businessman beside her quietly looked away, unable to meet Adrian's gaze. Even the event manager appeared deeply moved. Adrian then turned back toward me. "Grace Walker," he said gently, "thank you for reminding everyone here what real courage looks like." I struggled to find my voice. "You do not even know me." Adrian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps not as well as I should." He paused thoughtfully before continuing. "But I know enough to recognize a person whose character cannot be measured by wealth, clothing, or circumstance." Daniel stepped forward and quietly handed Adrian a small leather notebook. Adrian accepted it without taking his eyes off me. "There's another reason I could not allow you to leave tonight believing you stood alone," he said. He carefully opened the worn notebook and looked at a faded page that had clearly been preserved for many years. His calm expression changed into one of quiet remembrance. Then he looked back at me and spoke words that stopped my breathing for a moment. "I believe we have already met once before, although you probably never knew who I was, and what you did for me on that day changed the course of my entire life. The smallest act of kindness can become the greatest debt a grateful heart will spend a lifetime trying to repay." I stood frozen as Adrian carefully closed the worn leather notebook in his hands. The ballroom remained silent, but somehow the room no longer felt cold. Everyone was waiting for an explanation, including me. I searched his face, convinced I had never met him before, yet there was no uncertainty in his eyes. Only quiet gratitude. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "I wish I remembered." Adrian smiled, with understanding rather than disappointment. "You were never supposed to remember," he replied softly. "For you, it lasted only a few minutes. For me, it became the beginning of everything." He opened the notebook once more and carefully removed an old photograph that had faded around the edges. Daniel stepped closer and handed it to me. My hands trembled as I looked down. It showed a community volunteer event from nearly 15 years earlier. Several college students stood beside folding tables covered with donated books and sandwiches for struggling families. One of those smiling volunteers was unmistakably me. My breath caught in my throat. "This was during my sophomore year," I whispered. "I volunteered there every Saturday." Adrian nodded. "I was 16 years old." His voice became quieter. "My mother had just passed away after a long illness. My father was already disappearing into a life that left little room for family. I wandered into that community center because I had nowhere else to go." Fragments of forgotten memories slowly returned. I remembered a quiet teenage boy sitting alone outside behind the building, staring at the sidewalk while everyone else attended the event inside. I remembered carrying him a sandwich because he looked like he had not eaten all day. I remembered giving him a paperback novel from the donation table because he kept looking at the books without taking one. I remembered telling him something that had seemed completely ordinary at the time. Adrian looked at me with unmistakable warmth. You told me that people are never defined by the chapter they're living through. You said every story deserves another page. Tears blurred my vision. I actually said that. Adrian smiled. You did. He gently touched the worn notebook. I wrote those words down that night because I was afraid I might forget them. Around us, the ballroom guests listened without making a sound. The same people who had judged me only minutes earlier now watched a completely different story unfold. Adrian continued calmly. You never asked my last name. You never asked why I looked lost. You simply treated me with kindness when I believed the world had nothing left to offer. I slowly shook my head in disbelief. I never imagined something so small could matter that much. Adrian answered without hesitation. To someone who feels invisible, kindness is never small. Lily quietly tugged on my sleeve. Mom, she whispered, you helped him before you even knew him. I smiled through my tears and gently squeezed her hand. Sometimes we help people without realizing they will remember us forever. Adrian looked toward Lily with the same quiet respect he had shown her mother. Your mother changed one frightened boy's future with nothing more than compassion. He then turned back toward me. Everything I have accomplished since then began with the hope you gave me that afternoon. I could see complete sincerity in his eyes. There was no attempt to impress anyone in the room. Only gratitude. The event manager slowly stepped forward, visibly emotional. Grace, he said quietly, I think everyone here owes you an apology. Before I could answer, the sharply dressed woman who had criticized us earlier lowered her head and took a hesitant step toward me. Her voice trembled with genuine regret. I judged your circumstances without seeing your character, she admitted softly. I was wrong. The ballroom remained completely still as I looked at her, knowing that the next words spoken would determine whether this remarkable evening became a story about humiliation or a story about grace. Grace does not become extraordinary because life becomes easier. She becomes extraordinary because she refuses to let kindness disappear when life finally becomes fair. I looked at the woman standing before me, her confident expression replaced by genuine regret. A few minutes earlier, her words had pierced my heart. Now her voice trembled with humility. I could have answered with anger. I could have reminded her how deeply she had embarrassed my daughter. Instead, I remembered the lesson I hoped Lily would carry for the rest of her life. I smiled. Gently. Thank you for saying that. I replied quietly. Everyone deserves the chance to become a better version of themselves. The woman lowered her head with visible relief. I hope your daughter can forgive me too. Lily stepped closer, still holding my hand. She looked at the woman for a moment before giving a small smile. Mom says people can learn from mistakes if they really mean they are sorry. Tears gathered in the woman's eyes. Your mother is raising an incredible little girl. Adrian watched the exchange silently. There was unmistakable admiration in his expression. Daniel leaned closer and spoke softly enough that only Adrian could hear. You were right. Adrian nodded. No amount of wealth can teach what that little family already understands. The event manager approached us once again, this time carrying a folder instead of worry. Grace, he said, after everything that has happened tonight, I do not want you to leave believing your future depends on temporary jobs. We have been planning to open a second event venue next spring, and I would like you to become the operations supervisor. I looked at him in complete surprise. Me? He smiled sincerely. Not because of tonight, because during the past 3 years, every employee has described you as the most dependable person on our team. Tonight simply reminded me that leadership begins with character. Before I could answer, Adrian gently raised one hand. If I may, he said respectfully, I would like to support the expansion project as an investor. I immediately looked toward him. I cannot accept charity. Adrian met my eyes with calm understanding. I would never insult you by offering charity. His voice remained steady. The investment belongs to the business. The position belongs to you because you earned it long before we met again. His words settled every doubt inside me. For the first time in years, I felt someone recognize my effort instead of my hardship. Lily quietly tugged on Adrian's jacket. Does this mean Mom will smile more? Adrian knelt so he could look at her at eye level. I certainly hope so. Lily suddenly wrapped her little arms around his neck in a spontaneous hug. Adrian paused for only a heartbeat before returning the embrace with gentle care, careful not to overwhelm the child who had trusted him so completely. Watching them together filled me with an unexpected warmth. It was not romance. It was something deeper. It was the quiet feeling that two lonely lives had recognized each other. As Lily stepped back, Adrian smiled at her. Thank you. She tilted her head curiously. For what? For reminding me that hope is easier to find when someone shares it with you. Lily nodded as though the answer made perfect sense. The ballroom slowly returned to life, yet many guests remained watching us with thoughtful expressions instead of judgment. Something had shifted far beyond one evening. People were no longer talking about a poor single mother. They were talking about dignity. As Daniel checked a message on his phone, his expression changed slightly. He walked toward Adrian and quietly handed him a small envelope that had just been delivered by courier. This arrived from the city archives, Daniel explained. Adrian opened it and carefully unfolded an aging document. His eyes stopped on one familiar family name. Then he slowly looked back at me with quiet astonishment. Grace, he said almost in disbelief. There is something about your family that neither of us has ever known, and I think it explains why fate brought us together long before either of us realized it. Sometimes the answers we search for in the future have been quietly waiting inside the past all along. Adrian carefully folded the aging document before looking at me once more. The ballroom had slowly returned to conversation, but the quiet space surrounding us felt untouched by the noise. Daniel remained beside him, holding several additional records that had arrived from the city archives only minutes earlier. Grace, Adrian said gently, your grandfather volunteered at the same neighborhood outreach center where we first crossed paths. I frowned in surprise. My grandfather? Adrian nodded. According to these records, he helped organize literacy programs and food drives for struggling families for more than 20 years. A distant memory slowly surfaced. I smiled faintly. He always believed that no act of kindness was ever wasted. He used to tell me that people should leave every place a little brighter than they found it. Adrian's expression softened. My mother knew him. My eyes widened. What? Daniel carefully handed me an old black and white photograph. There, standing together outside the community center decades earlier, were my grandfather and a young woman whose smile looked remarkably like Adrian's. On the back, someone had written a simple sentence. Thank you for reminding us that dignity belongs to everyone. Adrian looked at the photograph for several quiet seconds before speaking. When my mother was raising me alone, your grandfather made certain we never felt ashamed for accepting help. He never treated us like a charity case. He treated us like neighbors. Tears filled my eyes once again. I never knew. Adrian smiled gently. Neither did I until today. The discovery settled into my heart with unexpected warmth. What had seemed like coincidence now felt like something far more meaningful. Long before either of us understood who the other would become, our families had already crossed paths through simple acts of compassion. Several weeks passed, and construction began on the company's second event venue exactly as planned. True to his word, Adrian never interfered with my responsibilities. He did not give me special treatment. He simply ensured I had every opportunity to succeed through my own work. Every morning I arrived before sunrise, reviewed schedules, coordinated staff, and solved problems one by one. My confidence slowly returned. Employees respected my decisions because I earned their trust, not because anyone had instructed them to. Lily visited the office after school whenever my schedule became too long. She loved sitting in the conference room with her homework while pretending to manage meetings using colored pencils and sticky notes. Adrian occasionally stopped by during the afternoon. Instead of discussing business first, he always greeted Lily before anyone else. Sometimes he brought a new children's novel. Other days, he surprised her with a puzzle or a science kit. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful gifts chosen with care. One Saturday, he invited us to a quiet city park overlooking the river. There are no security teams surrounding us, no formal events, and no expensive restaurants. We walked along the tree-lined paths, while Lily raced ahead, chasing butterflies across the grass. Adrian carried a paper bag filled with sandwiches from a small neighborhood deli instead of a luxury picnic. "This place reminds me of childhood," he admitted. "Peace was easier to find here." I smiled. "Lily loves it because nobody judges what you are wearing." Adrian looked toward my daughter, laughing beneath the afternoon sun. Children notice acceptance long before adults do. Lily suddenly ran back, carrying a handful of tiny wildflowers. She divided them carefully into 2 small bundles before handing one to me and the other to Adrian. "Families should all have flowers," she declared proudly. Adrian accepted them with surprising seriousness. "Then I will take very good care of mine." I watched the gentle exchange, realizing how naturally the 3 of us had begun sharing ordinary moments. Nothing had been forced. Nothing had happened too quickly. Trust had quietly grown through consistency, respect, and kindness. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the Chicago skyline, Lily reached for one of my hands and one of Adrian's. Without thinking, we both let her lead us down the winding path together. Daniel watched from a respectful distance with a quiet smile, but as his phone vibrated, his expression gradually became thoughtful. He walked toward Adrian carrying a sealed envelope marked with an unfamiliar family crest. "This arrived at headquarters an hour ago," he said softly. Adrian opened it, read the first page, and his calm expression slowly changed. Someone claiming to know the full history of both families had requested a private meeting, and what they intended to reveal promised to change everything we believed about the remarkable chain of kindness that had brought us together. The greatest miracles are rarely accidents. They are often the quiet result of generations choosing kindness over pride. Adrian remained thoughtful throughout. The drive to the private meeting arranged by the mysterious letter. Daniel sat beside him with the sealed envelope resting on his lap while the Chicago skyline slowly disappeared behind them. I had been invited as well, although neither Adrian nor I knew exactly why. Lily stayed with my trusted neighbor for the afternoon, happily promising to finish her homework before I returned. The meeting took place inside a small historical library that had once served as a community learning center decades earlier. It was peaceful, filled with shelves of worn books and photographs honoring volunteers whose names most people had long forgotten. An elderly gentleman stood, waiting beside one of the display cases. His silver hair and gentle smile immediately gave him an air of quiet wisdom. "Mr. Brooks," he greeted warmly. "Ms. Walker, thank you for coming." Adrian offered a respectful handshake. "You asked to meet us." The gentleman nodded. "My name is Samuel Carter. I served on the board of the community center where both of your families volunteered many years ago." He slowly opened an old wooden archive box and carefully removed several photographs, handwritten letters, and attendance records preserved for nearly 3 decades. "People often remember donations," Samuel said softly. "They rarely remember the people who quietly created hope." He handed me one photograph after another. My grandfather appeared in nearly every image, organizing reading circles for children, delivering food baskets, and helping parents find work. Beside him stood Adrian's mother, smiling while reading stories to young families. Samuel looked toward Adrian. "Your mother often said she survived her hardest years because Grace's grandfather refused to let anyone feel ashamed for needing help." Adrian remained silent, studying the photographs with deep emotion. Samuel continued. "Years later, after your mother passed away, Grace unknowingly continued the same tradition. She volunteered here every Saturday while attending college. That is where she met you." I slowly realized something extraordinary. Neither my grandfather nor I had ever known Adrian's family name. We had simply helped whoever walked through the door. Samuel smiled gently, as though reading my thoughts. "That is why kindness matters. It expects nothing in return." Adrian carefully unfolded another document resting inside the archive box. It was a handwritten letter from his late mother addressed to the community volunteers. One sentence immediately caught his attention. If my son ever becomes successful, I hope he remembers that true greatness is measured by the people he chooses to lift, never by the people he leaves behind. Adrian quietly closed his eyes for a moment before carefully returning the letter to its protective sleeve. She would have loved meeting Grace, he whispered. Samuel smiled. I believe she already did, through the kindness your lives continued to share. As we prepared to leave, Adrian turned toward me. Everything that brought us here began long before either of us understood it. I nodded, unable to hide my smile. Maybe some promises are carried through generations instead of spoken aloud. Outside the library, the late afternoon sunlight filled the quiet street with a warm golden glow. Adrian and I walked side by side without needing many words. The silence between us no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable. When we reached my apartment building, Lily ran toward us the moment she spotted our car. She threw her arms around me before looking up at Adrian with her usual bright smile. Did you find your answers? She asked innocently. Adrian knelt beside her and smiled with quiet affection. We found something even better. Lily tilted her head. What is better than answers? Adrian looked briefly toward me before gently replying, knowing that good people can change each other's lives without ever realizing it. Lily reached for both of our hands, completely satisfied with that answer. As we walked toward the building together, Daniel received another message on his phone. He quietly approached Adrian, his normally calm expression carrying unmistakable excitement. Construction on the new community center has been completed ahead of schedule, he said. The opening ceremony is next Saturday, and the board has asked if the two of you would be willing to dedicate it. Together, Adrian looked at me with a quiet smile, sensing that the next chapter of our story would not begin with wealth or power, but with a place where countless new acts of kindness could finally begin.